Welcome back to the US Equestrian Open review show. We're here to talk about TerraNova. I'm Annie Bishop, and I'm delighted to be joined by Diarm Byrne from EquiRatings. Hi, Dee.
Hi, Annie. Good to be back.
It's been we were talking about Bucart last, and now all eyes last weekend turned to TerraNova. And it was an exciting weekend. It was a small field, but it really was a quality field. And I don't think maybe a ton of surprises, but it was a great show all around.
I sat down on Saturday night and you're trying to write the review piece. And as I'm reviewing it, I'm thinking, okay, it follows the script was one of the pieces I was talking about. Like it pretty much does follow the script, except the fact that we had a script probably at Bucart, which means, when we spoke to Sarah on was it a Friday night before they went cross country, we were talking about like she's going to have to chase down Philip. We obviously had a script when Hannah Sue Holberg gave us that news on Sunday morning that Business Ben wouldn't be running all the way back at leg one in Morvern. So you have that in the back of your mind, which is, yes, it's eventing. Yes, things will go wrong. This isn't, it's not all going to be the way EquiRatings data says it's going to be. And everyone loves to remind us of that. But there was no doubt you had two really strong horses coming in Quasi Cool and Azur, ridden by Philip. We know Philip had missed the opportunity to get those points at Bucart. The only bit for me is probably a good place to start. The current, at the time, I should say, series leader in Sarah Kazumplik with Rock Phantom in that really good run of form, unfortunately doesn't go forward after the dressage phase.
I know. I talked to Sarah. I mean, so she had rails in the show jumping on Friday, and I talked to Sarah. She was actually in a bad car accident on the Wednesday and was pretty sore and wasn't actually sure that she would be running. She was going to take it phase by phase.
Okay.
So I think she kind of knew going into the weekend, and Friday they had a good sort of where they would be on dressage. Show jumping didn't go to plan. It's not Rocky's strongest phase, but he's been much better. And I think Sarah just felt like it just wasn't meant to be, and she probably shouldn't be running cross country anyway. So unfortunate to have the CR on the record, but again, things are meant to be, and she just felt like it was not her weekend to be running. But it's a big part of the story.
As soon as that happens, you probably begin to see, okay, you don't get that head-to-head challenge that we saw at Bucart between those two, and you've still now got two Philip horses. Now, the way the series works, you get points per horse. So every finishing score is seen in the individual for the horse, I should say, because obviously you have to get each horse to finish in those positions. So like it logically, it makes sense. So points are available kind of for each position. So obviously, if you've got two horses, two 5-star horses who we saw here, you've got a great chance. And okay, without skipping forward too much, he gets that big 1-2 as it plays out, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail through the phases. But that ultimately, Annie, brings us to probably close to what we would have expected pre-competition.
I mean, it seemed like it. I was going back through the fan guide that you guys put together. I mean, it really felt like starting at dressage. It felt like the expected scores. I mean, the horses followed the script this weekend. It felt like they were on their expected scores. I don't think there were any huge deviations on that scoring. I mean, SBT Barolo was expected to have the lowest score in dressage, and he did. He was 0.8 above where he normally is. And so I think I thought that was interesting. But I think you always knew that Philip's horses would sort of be right where they were, but then you turn to the jumping phases. And like you said, two 5-star horses, they're going to, with Philip in the tack, like it's hard to sort of look past them. I mean, Philip did what Philip does. I mean, those horses, they jumped out of their skin. And the show jumping, it was too bad. One of the horses, Hayden Wathen and Contestor, they withdrew after the dressage. And so we didn't get to see them. So then we were down to a field of, 7. But the show jumping was influential. I mean, a Chris Barnard track always sort of does that. And I think there's atmosphere there. I, heard from some people that it was kind of breezy. And so some of the horses were on their toes, and there's flags all around the arena. And so there was a lot of flapping and a lot of, it just seemed like horses were a bit fresh, which you like to see at this point in the season. But I felt like dressage specifically stayed sort of pretty much to what you guys would have written as a scripted EquiRatings.
The interesting one, it did. And the interesting one for me with that was probably a fair degree, we've touched on it, but a fair degree of competition did. Like, one of my hopes was that Robert Walker would kind of hold on in terms of the time penalties. Like actually, in terms of that first phase, we had, I think that horse is 14, but we had expected that really good first phase, but actually it was one of the slower horses in the field on speed ratings. And like some of that is just coming from the amount of times that we've seen it tested. You know, there will be gaps in the data when horses are stepping into levels, but the gaps are not, okay, they're pretty well covered, because what happens is you've seen maybe 1,000 times a horse with this many runs step up into a competition at this level at a venue, and this is what the algorithms are constantly testing. Any show me horses that, and like when it's coding out the expected scores or the speed ratings going into a competition, it'll be showing you a level of experience coupled with where they're going. So essentially, like going into TerraNova and still at TerraNova, I think coming into the competition and even coming out of the competition, Lauren Nicholson and I'll Have Another are the only combination to have ever made the time here from nearly 120 horses now in this 4-star short. This is something that we're beginning to see more and more, isn't it? When you think of Morven as well, like anyone who has a speed horse in the US should be entering these competitions.
Well, that's what I find stunning. I mean, it's interesting because back to Robin Walker and SB2, that horse last ran at Morven and in the 3-star. And so you would think he'd have like a good base. Again, the 3-star was tough at Morven, and the horse looked great, and they had a 20 late on course, which is just too bad. But it's only his third run at the 4-star short level, I believe. But again, speed proved to be the day. I mean, let's talk about speed. Azur. I mean, that mare we haven't seen her run cross country since 5-star at Kentucky. Phillips had her out, done some dressage tests, done some show jumping, which we know are sort of where the mare maybe gets a bit hot and a bit harder to ride. But you turn that mare loose on cross country. I mean, she was the only one to stay in the single digits on time faults cross country. I mean, I think 9.6 time or something like that. And everyone else was like 22 time, 24 time, 17 time. I mean, she smoked around there, which you would expect her to, because she is a speedy mare. But again, I think to your point, if you've got a fast horse, you should be pointing it at the 4-star shorts at Morven and TerraNova and other places where it is hard to time, because you can really make up ground on the leaderboard.
It's a really valuable commodity in the modern sport, which is so first phase centric. So like you will, around the world now, over the last nearly 13 years, I would say, Annie, we're seeing a trend whereby dressage has improved by 0.5 every year, the global average. So, you know, if you were a rider, if you were a horse that was starting on 32 10 years ago, and you were making that the midpoint of a distribution, without getting too technical about it, this is kind of where the medium or the middle level was for horses. That number's moved by half a mark every year. So first phase is where people are training, the types of horses that we're bringing through the sport right now, and very often it's kind of incongruous with speed cross country.
How fast they are.
Really, really good dressage horses find it harder to make the time. And then you begin to see something else interesting happening, which is the influence of cross country is coming back. Now, it might not necessarily be the type of influence cross country that we have control of, which is, you know, there's so much talk going on at the moment about the flag rule. There's so much talk going on about how do we increase the influence of this one unique phase that eventing has. To be honest, it's kind of happening, but it's not really happening in the way that we would have wanted or envisaged. It's happening because really strong dressage horses are going cross country and they're not making the time. We've now had 3 events where we have focused on speed, and you go to big kind of showcase events, Burley this year being a good example. I mean, Harry Mead has this unbelievable day by getting 2 horses inside the time. It's a hard thing to do at 5-star, but on a day when nobody gets inside the time, you're able to start at 5-star level. Now you're able to start at 33, 34, but if you can make the time, most of the other horses are in double digits, and actually all the 25 horses are 35.
David Dole at Maryland. He started on a 34. He was 25 seconds inside the time, the only one, and he was a big climber.
I think it's something that we're going to see as a feature of the series now. If the first 3 events are anything to go on, if you have the gears cross country, there is an opportunity in the sport. Yes, in the series, but the series is really showcasing 4-star short level. Now, 4-star short level is the most difficult level to make the
I was
time.
just going to
Like
say,
it's
it is the place where you really, it's hardest to make the time because you've
yeah,
got all the jumping efforts. It's going to be technical, but you have to be able to keep moving through. And I think that's what Philip really showcased on Azur on Saturday. I mean, that mare has always been fast. I think sometimes containment or sort of getting her sort of to be
yeah,
as rideable as he would like her to be in the other phases, particularly. But I think, she's 12 this year and they've been together for a while now. So I think getting that partnership, but she is just fun to watch cross country. I mean, she loves it, like there's not a part of her that looked like she was really taking much of a breath out there. Where some of the
or
other
Philip.
horses, yeah, or Philip.
As in the commentary, Annie, at the end of it
Yeah.
says, I think Holly kind of pulled back, and Holly was like, "Well, they, a master in the saddle, and they don't necessarily look like they're going fast." But like, I think the initial view was they haven't really gone that fast. To be honest, I think Azure has more levels. I think as you
Oh,
come to this point in the season, it's very unlikely that Philip is pushing Azure to where Azure can get to. I think
yes.
that's accepted. But um but I think one of the comments was they've kind of taken it easy out there, and it's more of a reflection for me on the levels I think that Azure will have when the time comes.
There's no doubt. I mean, because you could see the other thing too is like you look at a mare like Azure go, and again, she's got gears that were not even touched, and she's ready to go, and she's game. Some of the other horses, they're either greener, like the SBT Barolo horse. He looked a bit tired, and I think that's maybe why they had the 20, but he looked great until then and jumped really well. But again, time. It's funny, you look at a mare like Azure and then you look at Couture, who's the pony.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That mare also jumps for fun. She just doesn't have quite as many gears, but she's game as well. And I thought she looked great. And I think she and Briggs probably had a really fun run around the country. And that mare is always sort of really fun to watch cross country. Again, small. And, I think people love to have a pony in the sport. I think it's really fun. And I think it like draws people in a way, which I think I love. And they call her Hottie at home for Hot Couture, which is, I think, really which is pretty great. So we really had such a range of horses in this class, which I always think is interesting too. And I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's something we're going to see throughout the series. We're going to see the 5-star campaigners like the Quasi Cool and the Azur. We're going to see the Coutures. We're going to see the SB2 Barolos who are sort of, this is their third 4-star short. Like, I think we're
Yeah.
going to get that mixture, which I think is just going to make it really interesting to watch because you're going to see every type of horse, and we'll see the Rock Phantoms again, where he's just sort of, he's going to hang at that level next year, which is also really fun. So I think that's one of the great things about the series. And I think it's proven out throughout the last 3 is they're going to have all types of horses in the series and on a weekend and going head to head, which I think is awesome.
I think you will. Before I go on Couture, it was Porter Size Just a Jiff, another Connemara pony
Yeah.
ridden by Camilla Spears, who got me into the sport. That was the horse that that I initially accessed the sport through. And it's so exciting to see small horses with so much heart. Like, I mean, Couture came in here, I think we highlighted it before the competition, but came in with a
Yeah.
really long cross country jumping clear streak, more than anyone else in the field. Like, they've shown it again and again in that phase. So we did expect them to be a climber. They were a climber. We've done 3 pods now, and I think
Yeah.
we've highlighted and focused on the mix, the breadth of horses that we're going to have an opportunity. That's a big part of what the series is about in terms of a participation level. The other piece that we really have taken from David O'Connor and from Bill and from Tom and from Vicky in terms of what sits behind the thinking of the series is fans and is being able to access them. And I actually think one of the stories that's going to move now, we've 3 events down, we're at the turn of the year, there's no more events before the end of the 2024 season. I think we will always have the underlying different stories, different horses. Isn't it great to be able to study them and look at, we talked about Emily Bashir and sitting in an airport
Yeah.
studying the Emily Bashir greys. we're going to have those stories, no doubt. And actually, it's an important discipline to be able to continue to find them and want to find them. But actually, I think we're hitting a turning point. Philip Dutton hits the front of the series, gets 2 horses in. 75 points. It shows that 75 points are achievable. A 1-2 is achievable. We're not going to see it that many times, I would expect, over the course of the season, but it is achievable. If you look at the Philip Dutton string and you give him 75 points and you think of, okay, we talked about it, Passante, Denim, Quasi Cool, Azur, you go through the string and you think, Philip, who jumped more cross country jumping clears than any other US rider in 2024. He has the string. He goes to 4-star shorts. He travels. I hope we'll get him on the show. I think we'll get him on the show soon. But
hopefully.
He might not be caught from here, which is a mental thing to say. And it's mental because...
Can you imagine if like next year at this time we're like, he did it from the front after the first 3.
Yeah, he did it from...
Just stayed.
And the first time he gets points. As in he missed.
By the way, he missed a fence at Buchart. He could have been over 100 points right now if he hadn't missed a fence on cross country, which is also mental to think about.
And if he was over 100 points, we've talked about it a little bit on other shows, but we're almost at the halfway point of what we're saying is 200. 200 plus is where we feel you're in the series prize money. You're off to Morven. You're off to the final. You're collecting the check at somewhere above 200. Okay, he's missed some points, like needlessly missed some points. Okay, it happens, but like 20, what would it have been? Another 40 points in the bag, probably. He was probably 40 for a win there. What gets really interesting for me from here is that the early part of the season felt like uncovering different stories. Go in and have to, really dig into the couture story. Go and check the amount of clear consecutive rounds. Go and as I say, go and find out about Emma Klugman. Check Australian wins on US soil. And what's the angle? The big one for me coming, Annie, is that 2 of the superstars that we saw last year, the fella who would have won this on our projections if we ran this series last year and we applied the points to the whole 2023 season, hasn't started yet, Will Coleman. Will and Boyd are probably... I was going to say,
we're missing 2 very key players in US eventing, and that would be Will Coleman and Boyd Martin, and they haven't been at any of these 3. And so I think you're right. And I think you also have to think about where we are in the season, right? This is the end of the season. TerraNova is the last FEI event of the year, I think. They've already sort of hit their fall target. So this time of year, I feel like is such a funny time of year. Fast forward to March, and we're at Buchart for the first time, for the first one of the series, of like the spring series. All the horses are coming out. You've got horses that are in their string that are coming up from 3-star level. They'll be aiming to 4-star shorts. Even if a 5-star, likely for these guys, will be the target for a lot of their horses, they're still going to run 4-star shorts before, and they've got a lot of depth in their string, as you say. It gets exciting.
Carolina comes straight off the back of Buchart. Will Coleman at Carolina is like first and second, first and third. We've seen it with Off the Record. We've seen it with, was it Dundante maybe, I think, had a big win there. He's delivered big wins. He's got all the records, I think, at Carolina, normally Will Coleman records. For me, it feels like there's a battle about to start, and Philip Dutton's just given himself 75 points to start with, and it's sensible. Like,
catch me if you can, but I
kind of, yeah. Catch me if you can.
I think that I think those guys will be coming for it. I think the other person who we haven't seen yet, who's had a lot of wins this year, is Caroline Pamuccio. Again, she's having a baby, but if we know anything about Caroline, I think she'll be back out in the spring and ready to go. And she's got a great string of horses as well. And she's a competitive person. And so I think if there's a chance to get in there with those points, I think she will be gunning for it too. So I think it's going to heat up very quickly when we get to March.
The wins are so heavy. Particularly we've seen smaller fields, which are 40-point wins. Once you go over 25 starters, as you will in some of the bigger venues, then you're going to see 50 points for wins. Caroline's string, like, she could close a gap in a month. Like, honestly, even if it's late spring, summer, by the time you see Caroline, like, she's got more wins international. Last year she had more wins than any other rider in the world internationally. This year, she's 8 international wins, only behind Laura Liederkirke. It was actually the two of them last year who were
battling
joint, I think, on 9-9 or on 8-8. And then Caroline took some wins at TerraNova actually last year, I
It's
think.
the latest one.
Yeah, the latest one. So this year she had to stop riding at some point, which means Lara was able to keep going and get to her 9 wins. But those two have battled it out for the last couple of years, which is an interesting one. Absolutely, I would see her emerging as a challenger, and without going through them all, because I think we'll have a chance in this gap now. I think we'll have a chance to look at some of the contenders. You've also got Tammy to come. You know, you've got Liz would have had a big season last year. I think it's worth mentioning that actually, if we had, who knows how that plays out in terms of the horsepower, but I certainly feel it's worth mentioning actually that on every projection you see, and all the records, you would have seen some of those superstars there as well. It was a weekend that followed the script, but I think for me now, we probably have an opportunity to take a breath. First 3 events done, we get an opportunity to learn. There was a little bit of setup in terms of the series overall, how the point scoring works, how we'll communicate, how often we'll communicate.
Well, I think even the riders are still curious. I
100%.
saw something the other day and they're like, how does this work again? It's like, okay, this is how it works. So yeah, it is just setting up and learning and sort of everyone realizing it's here.
And it's here for a little while, like there is a commitment from USEF to run this. So for us now, in terms of myself and yourself, in terms of USEF, in terms of commentary on site, at times it might feel a bit repetitive for us or for people that are always listening. But really, I think the goal now is to be able to bring that understanding of why it's happening, that idea that actually you can bring together a single narrative over all the 4-star shorts or over most of the 4-star shorts of the whole season, to give people a reason to be searching through SBT Barolo's record and be able to celebrate Emily Bashir and Emma Klugman and Philip and Will, and actually to celebrate all of the horses and riders across
and to also remember some of the misses. I think that's the interesting thing too, is you're not just looking back and thinking like, oh yeah, that was a good round, but you're like, that cost them points. I think it's finding that reason too, is sort of
a way to do it. Exactly. It's a really important part, I think, of storytelling and of connection, that actually the sport sometimes finds it hard without a reason to do it, which is to be able to, like, who wants to go into Jenny Brannigan's pin at Morven Park? Even writing the article about it, you're like, I don't really want to have to mention this on Jenny. And you're trying to put it into like, Jenny's a great rider. And, just before we came on this, we were looking at Cambalda records. And actually, you've got all of this that you want to get out each time. But I think for us as a sport and for real fan connection, having a legitimate way to be able to talk about that in terms of the disappointment that we feel helps just make it real. Like,
yeah, I mean, because it is real. I mean, it's even talking about Sarah having a car accident. I mean, there just things happen, right? Things happen in the sport, and that is part of the context for what a result sheets look like. Like that, there are reasons in that, and there's feelings in that, and I think that that's really the great thing about the series, and what you and I get to do is to find those reasons for people to care and to think about those things.
There's one more piece just before we go. I'm just going back to leaderboards here. I think that concept of your double horse almost
makes
had another
difference.
Yeah, it almost had another little turn in it. So we saw
Jenny Jarnstrom
Dennis. She had Flower Girl and Splash Dance, I think, here, and so I think it was Splash Dance who didn't complete. I think they were last out on course and didn't complete.
Correct.
But even without that completion, we have Jenny is now third in the series overall, with 45 points.
No, she's second.
She's second in the series with 45 points, ahead of the two winners. And could have been more, like, because you were almost guaranteed top 6 just for finishing, so you were in point scoring territory. But I think it's another angle on there will be smaller fields next year. As much as we talk about those big guns coming out to play, there will be strategic runs that happen next year. And if you're smart and if you've got a couple of horses and you're able to arrive at the right competitions at the right time, I think you're beginning to see the emergence of other stories. I think she's one for me that I got to go and look up and figure out about and go search for images
Not
on.
every
And
day there's a Swedish rider in the
yeah,
US riding. And yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely
uh,
the double horses thing. And again, I think it speaks to the horsepower that some of these other ones coming through. And if they will get strategic about it. I mean, I saw that Philip hadn't targeted TerraNova because of the US Open, but that he was like really pleased it was there and happy it was happening. But now he's again walking away with 75 points and at the top of the leaderboard. So maybe the US Open is more on his radar for next year and where he's targeting horses.
yeah, I think there's a point again with an early season piece that like that's normal. But I think the goal is that if that's happening at the end of the season, we haven't landed. Like that's
Yeah.
like for me, that's the bit that I want to be listening to, where I'm like, no problem after a couple of events if they're arriving, but by the end of the season, I'm positive there won't be anyone at Morven Park in a 4-star long that doesn't know they're competing for €200,000 prize
There's no
pot
doubt
or dollars prize pot. You know, like they're gonna know by Morven. Philip is gonna know what his points are going into the final events of the 2025 season. We'll have lots of time, Annie, to prep
and it's exciting,
the
and we
2025.
get to go back to these venues. We're going to see how they progress, and yeah, I think this was like a great way to end the first three and sort of as we go into the new year. And I think I can't wait for all the content we're going to be coming back with as we get into the beginning of the new year in 2025.
Well, I don't think we'll be gone for too long. So
Yep.
I think probably hopefully as we come towards the end of the season. So yes, we do have a gap now until TerraNova and Carolina in terms of the 4-star short season, and the natural eventing break is now beginning post TerraNova and around the world. I think from a storytelling point of view, we have the opportunity as we get into the kind of Christmas time and all that Love Actually and nostalgia.
The
And
reviews and the
the
previews
review
and the
season
thinking
begins.
about what's
Yeah,
happening.
exactly. The review season begins. But I think we'll have a chance to look at big contenders. Who's got the horsepower? Who's coming through? How other people have run at those venues.
I'm excited to dig into the horsepower, but I'm also excited to dig into like the up and comers, because I do think that that's going to be an interesting angle. Even if they're not the ones that are going to win the series, I think we're going to see some superstars next year coming through. And I think there'll be horses that we'll be talking about for a while. So I'm excited to dig into that as well.
It's all ahead of us. Annie,
It is.
thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the fun in the first three events. And
It's an exciting series, and I can't wait to talk about it more.
Thanks,
Be
Annie.
well. Bye.